And so I do deals all over the country, and we're just a high risk, high reward kind of elite specialist company. We'd like to call ourselves the SEAL Team 6 of real estate.
You are listening to the Property Developer Podcast, your home for tips, ideas and inspiration to help take your developing to the next level. Now here's your host, Justin Getty.
Hello and welcome to episode 58 of the show. Thanks for joining me. I hope you are well and your projects are chugging ahead. I am fine. Got another awesome conversation coming up about selling property from someone who markets hard to sell real estate, including the story of how he sold a ranch for $1 billion. That's right, B for billion. So I'm sure you will enjoy his tips and ideas. It seems I have a bit of a series developing around billion-dollar property stories. Hopefully yours is one in the making, and we can talk about it in the future. Before we get to today's guest, here's what I've been up to lately. On my project going through planning, we managed to clear up the confusion around the status of our application, and the proposal is currently at the public notice stage. So I'm waiting to see what sort of reaction we get from the locals. On my other project, we are working through the engineering drawings and other consultant reports for the construction documentation. So everything is slowly moving along. And just quickly before we get to today's guest, if you want to learn how to develop property safely and successfully, then email me, justin@propertydeveloperpodcast.com, about the mentoring program that is available to help you get started on your development career. Okay, on to our guest, real estate agent Bernard Uechtritz. Bernie is an Aussie who's based in Dallas, Texas, and he's forged a reputation selling unique, hard to sell and high value property, with his largest transaction, a ranch in Texas valued at around 1 billion Australian dollars. That's a B for billion. I was keen to speak with Bernie to find out how you go about marketing and selling a property with such a high value. Bernie has sold some amazing real estate over the years, including an infamous property where a family murder took place. And I'm sure you will enjoy his insights into some of the key tactical activities he employs, what is different about selling high-end property, and what developers should think about when marketing their projects. Keep an ear out for the groundwork that Bernie puts in before he even has the authority to sell a property. Interestingly enough, Bernie and me also share a history of growing up in Papua New Guinea. So his response to my opening question about what he would eat until he was sick brought a big smile to my face.
Solely plums.
There you go. Yes, I too have a secret love of salted plums, and just had some not that long ago. So that'd be our PNG connection coming through there.
Yeah, that's right.
And have you eaten any lately?
I have, as a matter of fact. I have a few places over here where I can go and get them.
I was going to say, I wouldn't have thought there'd be too many places in Dallas, Texas that stock salted plums.
No, but I found them, so that's all good.
Oh, well, that's a unique answer so far on my show.
Yeah, well, anybody from New Guinea will be able to relate.
Well, that's a good segue into, I guess, your history, and the reason we're talking today is around selling property, and you're a gun property salesperson who's probably done one of the biggest transactions I'm aware of, which would be a $1 billion Australian property transaction, which we'll get to. But can you give us a bit of your history? There's obviously a PNG connection there that you and I both share, but can you give us a bit of a background about yourself and how you got into selling property?
So I was raised in Papua New Guinea, went to school there. Then I went to a series of boarding schools after that in Australia and New Zealand. Went to Longreach Ag College, which did absolutely nothing towards my real estate career, but I could shear a sheep or butcher a beast by the time I left. I came to America in 1989, and I came through Kentucky. I was there for 4 years, began playing polo, ended up in Southern California playing polo, and at that time I got my real estate license in 1993, and started my real estate career in Southern California. And it was mostly built. It was at the time that the market was at rock bottom, and I started sort of in the luxury marketplace. I represented a lot of banks around the country, yet were foreclosing on homes and taking back a lot of inventory, and so I sort of really cut my teeth on that. And then early in my career, I sold a what we call a stigmatized property. It was for the Menendez brothers who had killed their parents, and it had been on the market for about 5 years. They were unable to sell it. I came up with a plan. I sold it, and that sort of led to my sort of being involved in hard to do, difficult sales, right? Unique sales. The next thing I did was I was engaged to appraise and evaluate the O.J. Simpson and Nicole Simpson estates. And I did that. I didn't sell them, but I was involved in sort of dissolving them. And that really led to a career of sort of, like I said, hard to do, unique real estate. And I did that. I continued that in Southern California up until 2004. And during that time, I had a chain of Remax companies initially, franchises. I had 12 franchise areas and 2 offices, sold those. Did another company called Frontgate Realty, which was predominantly a luxury market, sort of Brentwood, Hidden Hills, Calabasas, Malibu area, and did well with that. I was very lucky. Got involved in some development in Southern California, and then in 2004 moved to Texas. And when I moved to Texas, I'd bought a failed television company and sort of tried to turn it around, and got back into real estate. And I got back into sort of ranching, which is my background. So, because I'm originally from plantations and cattle and horses. So I started that in 2000 and I guess really 06. Then again, I sort of fell into these sort of hard to do properties. And I have since then built a business around just that. So what I do is I sell difficult, unique, one-of-one type properties, mostly ranches, but not exclusively ranches. I do industrial, commercial, anything that's really hard to sell. It might be years in litigation, estate dissolution, failed developments, that sort of thing. And I kind of own that marketplace in America, really, but certainly Texas. And so I do deals all over the country, and we're just a high risk, high reward kind of elite specialist company. We'd like to call ourselves the SEAL Team 6 of real estate. So people come to us with a proposition or a difficult deal. I figure out how to do it. I figure out what the rules are going to be, what the campaign's going to look like, what it is, how to position it in the marketplace, who the potential buyers may or may not be, whether it's a state buyer, a national buyer, or an international buyer. And we sort of pride ourselves on having really solid international and national campaigns and doing things on a sort of compressed timeline, right? So a lot of people in real estate, as you know, list a property, put a sign up, and hope they get in the way of a deal. My philosophy is that every property has a story or stories to tell. So tell those stories, design a campaign around those stories, and take the campaign to the market in the best way and the best places that you can as fast as you can. So there's no one size fits all. Everything has, there's no 2 properties that are the same in my marketplace. And my marketplace is generally, $20 million, $30 million, $50 million, $100, $250 million. Certainly I've done some higher, but generally speaking, that's the range of what I do.
And it's slightly different in the US, isn't it, when you're marketing or selling property, and that the selling agent takes on the costs for the marketing? Is that correct?
Yeah, for the most part. Traditionally, that's the way it's done. At my level, a lot of my clients have skin in the game. It's part of my contract. And if for whatever reason they make the property unavailable, or they decide to be difficult to deal with, or they decide they want to take it off the market, there's a fairly hefty penalty for that.
And what is it you think attracts you to those difficult to sell properties?
Well, I've always been a kid that's had a great fear of failure. At the end of the day, I'm an uneducated kid from New Guinea. I'm a Queensland boy that grew up in a family of 10 children. I'm the eighth, sort of the survival of the fittest, and so I've always, because of my education and my upbringing or lack thereof, I've always sort of been an against the grain, underdog type of person, and my track record at a series of boarding schools for not sort of staying between the lines is a bit of a giveaway for that. So I tend to like to make my own rules. So and I've been able to be fortunate and parlay that into a rewarding career.
And so, when you're talking about doing a campaign for a hard to sell property or for real estate,
Yep.
And you talk about telling a story, I mean, how does that work? I mean, for example, the one where you had the property that it had a murder in it, I'm guessing the murder is a part of the story, or is it?
Well, yeah, not so much in those cases because they're pretty, they're pretty negative stories. So what you got to figure out is, when I say stories, you got to figure out it's really positioning. So when you don't have a big negative connotation, such as a death or a murder or whatever with it, then you roll it out one way. If you do have that sort of connotation with it or that stigma with it, is most real estate agents try and sort of sidestep that or not talk about it or whatever. I'm very much a believer in transparency, and I believe that at the end of the day, as good as I am or as good as any agent is, at the end of the day, properties sell themselves, right? And I've got a great saying: the property market is like the car market. There's an ass for every seat. So that means that my job as a broker is to cast a wide net in a marketing and advertising campaign and create a competitive marketing environment that's induces people into the process and is conducive to selling a property as fast as practical. Most of my campaigns are designed around a 12 to a 15-month soup to nuts close. Traditionally, ranchers in Texas and largely in America, the thinking used to be, and still is, not in my company, but in others, that, we'll put it on the market and let's hope that in 2 or 3 or 4 years we'll get it sold. I don't have that kind of time. So I design campaigns that are intentionally compressed and designed to, hit a peak within a certain period of time, go through the negotiating process in a certain period of time, and then close thereafter. Because once you expose a property to the open market, there's a sort of a 90 to 120 day period, whereas if I do my job right and I've built the right campaign and I've put the right sort of marketing out there, there's a peak of interest level, right, in the marketplace. So if you cast a net and you go to the four corners of the world or the four corners of the state or the four corners of the nation, whatever it is, that's when the fever pitch is. So in that pool of interest is your buyer or your buyers. And so you sort of narrow it down there. So it's sort of like getting all the cats in a room, herding the cats, catch one by the tail and hang on.
And so can you talk us through the campaign development? Like what sort of tactical activities are you thinking about, or is there go-to things that you just immediately put in your campaign, like a video or press, or how does that work?
Yeah, so if you go to my website, icon.global, you'll see a whole series of videos. I think videos are a really integral part of selling the type of property that I do. But again, there's no one size fits all. Every property is different. Its pluses and minuses are different. Some of them have revenue streams, some of them don't. Some of them have oil and gas. Some of them have minerals of other kinds. Some of them have water rights, wind rights, all sorts of things now. So they're all different, And so you have to build, as I say, a custom campaign around that. So generally what I'll do, with differences, but generally what I'll do is I'll spend anywhere from 60 to 90, even 120 days figuring out, doing my due diligence. And in that time, I'll learn all about the property. I'll learn all about the sellers. I'll learn all about the dynamics surrounding it. I'll put together all the information, surveys, plat maps, figure out what the oil and gas and mineral situation is, what the ownership is, all of that kind of thing. Livestock, cash flow, negatives, positives, water, wind, all of that sort of thing. And we'll build a data room. So we'll have 2 data rooms. We'll have an electronic data room and we'll have a physical data room.
Is that the same as a data room?
Yeah, same as a data room, mate. So I'll build that. Then I will send sort of a teaser out to all my sort of AAA clients and AAA contacts around the world. So I've probably got the largest database of sort of high net worth buyers and clientele in the world, probably.
I can imagine that's quite a colourful list that you've got.
Yeah,
Bernie.
It's a big cast of characters, and but I've developed that over 30 years, and I've also been associated over that time with some fairly big companies that have added to the depth of that data list. So it'll go out to them. Then I'll go out to, and they'll get sort of 15 to 30 days heads up. Hey, this is coming soon. Wanted you to be the first to know. Then we'll go out to all the A-level brokers. Then I'll do a mainstream. I'll generally do a mainstream media campaign. So I've developed again over the years, a pretty good list of journalists from Bloomberg News and CNN and Fox Business and the Dallas Morning News and the LA Times and just all the big newspapers, right? Mainstream media, Wall Street Journal, New York Times. And I've cultivated those contacts over the years. And so I make a journalist's job easy. I give them the content. I give them great pictures. I give them great video. They run with a story. I put the stories together, give them the bullet points. I'll do a press release. But again, I'll give preferred journalists a preferred first look. Then I'll go with a statewide or a nationwide or a worldwide press release, depending on what the property is. And so that's what you're generating. There's a build, right? There's a build of awareness. From the time we go mainstream and we go public, that's when you have about, if you do your job right, you have sort of 90 to 120 days where the property becomes at its highest level of interest. Because after that, the needle starts to drop off. Yeah. Now, during that campaign, depending on outside influences, maybe oil prices or maybe housing market or something in the economy, things that you can't control within the context of your campaign, that might change. So which might impact what you're doing. So you have to be what I call fleet of foot. You have to be ready to pivot and go to plan B or take this tactic or that tact, right? So again, not a one size fits all, and people often ask me, hey, what's the formula? And the formula is that it's secret soup every time. There's no one size fits all. And
I have to ask you about the big transaction that you did. I think it was $750 million US. So roughly about
725.
Roughly about $1 billion Aussie dollars.
Right.
That's a big transaction.
It was a good day, and it was well earned. So there's a great example of a process. I was working for about a year undercover. It was a very large legacy estate belonging to a big legacy family, 535,000 acres, all under one fence. It had a farming component, had a cattle component, horse component, water component. And it had been in litigation literally for about 25 years when I came along. And so my job was to figure out a way to help these attorneys and judges give them an exit strategy, and an exit strategy that everybody could feel comfortable with and trust. That was a lot of work. We sold that property and closed it in about 15 months. I went public with the campaign in August of 2014. I had it sold. I did a call for offers and had it sold in October of 2015. We had 4 finalists from around the world, ultra high net worth people, and we kept that undercover, and we announced the sale and closed it in February of 2016.
And I think you were quite strategic in the work that you did prior to the listing, in that you were attending the court hearings, you're doing a lot of ground laying to try and secure the project.
Yeah, so there's a lot of work involved because, with a big deal like that, you have, it's been out there for years. There's a lot of competing interests. There was a receiver involved, and there was 2 families involved primarily. So you had the receiver in the court who had their agenda, and then you had each side of these families that had their own agendas. And with those agendas comes the likes and dislikes and preferences of, who are they going to use and how are they going to get it sold, and maybe some of them don't even want to sell it. Right, so there's a lot of that. So, as George Bush likes to say, there's a lot of strategery involved. So some of that strategery involved me, having meetings at 2:00 in the morning in dark places with different people, and a lot of lead up work. A lot of convincing, a lot of private meetings, a lot of convincing people. That I was a guy they could trust. In some cases I was, known, and in other cases I was really unknown, right?
And so when you talk about coming up with a story for a property like that, what was your angle, or what did you come up with? What were you thinking?
Yeah, so that one was pretty easy, actually. Firstly, I'm a very emotional, passionate kind of a guy. And I'm very passionate about what I do. And so I looked at this property. It had been in litigation for 25 years. It was an iconic, American cowboy story. And with all of the associations that go with that, its rise to fame. This is a property that used to produce oil that actually fueled, during World War II, some of the Asia Pacific campaign. There were families, generations of families, about 120 families that had worked, lived, loved, died, married on this ranch, had given their lives to this ranch. Some of their kids had gone away to war. Some of them had come back. Some of them hadn't come back. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of that. So a lot of my campaign focused around the iconic legacy of this ranch, 1. And 2, it was my goal to keep this ranch together. Some of the other contenders were talking about cutting it up into ranchettes and dividing it up and doing all of this stuff. I made it very clear publicly, and I went out on a limb. High risk, high reward, obviously, is what I do. But I sort of made a vow to the people and the families that I would keep it together as one. And that I would, or at least I would do my level best to do that. You never know. You don't know what you don't know when you start a campaign. But I think if you use the principles of transparency and integrity and morality and all of that stuff, if you incorporate those into a campaign where everybody can see you and touch you and feel you and know who you are and what you're doing, you're not just a slick sales guy, because at the end of the day, the sales result, the dollar amount, the money part, that won't change, right? And the fact that it's going to be on the market and it's going to be sold, that's not going to change either. How you get there, you can control that, So if you get there with transparency and integrity and a common sense approach, I spent time listening to and a lot of time listening to a 77-year-old African American cleaner that had been there since he was a boy. And it was he and I alone in the headquarters building, for months. I stayed in an apartment in the headquarters building for months as I was doing my workup. And spent a lot of time with him. I learned a lot about the history. I learned a lot about the families. I listened to the stories. And when you take on a project like that, it's all about, you got to be a great listener, and find the nuggets and find the anecdotal pieces of what's important to those people. And if you can embrace that, and if you can incorporate that into your campaign, that's a good thing. Because people like to be heard, especially when you've got two ultra wealthy families that have fought for 25 years over whose ranch it's going to be or not going to be. And then you have, 120 something employees who've lived under that cloud for that time. And they've seen a lot of suspicious characters come and go, right? And so I made it a point at the beginning of that campaign to not be a suspicious character. It helps that I'm different. I look different. I sound different. I'm from a different country. It helps that I can talk cow, and I can talk horse, and I can talk oil, right? And I can talk about things that are interesting to those people, which is plantations. And I'm a big World War II buff. Growing up in New Guinea, all of that sort of thing. So just like the properties, I have an interesting story to tell. That's engaging. That's real. And so people, you build a relationship of trust with that.
And what have you learned about the buyer side? So when you're dealing with a lot of zeros in these transactions, what have you learned about the buyers that you're dealing with to try and get that signature on the contract?
I would say that buyers in my line of business fall into two really distinct categories. And those would be really genuine, transparent, successful, integral people, like the guy that I sold the ranch to, a guy called Stan Kroenke, great guy. Most billionaires didn't get to be billionaires because they were stupid or arrogant or small-minded or whatever. And in any case, the majority of them that get to that state in life, that have real money, they're looking to do something good with it. So their intention, as with Stan's intention in buying this ranch, was to turn it around, was to make it better than it was to freshen it up, it was probably operating at about 25, maybe 35% efficiency. 4 years later now, Stan's got that ranch, operating probably at about 85 or 90. But he, there's guys like him, there's a little cowboy in a lot of those guys. They want to, they've made it. They want something to call their own. And he, at the same time, he's contributing to the cattle industry, the horse industry, the AQHA, American Quarter Horse Association, those sorts of things. So that's one type of buyer. The other type of buyer in my business is those that are, not to be trusted. There's guys that are, we call them promoters. Promoters, schemers, scammers. I deal with a lot of those I get a lot of those guys because of the type of product that I have. I don't personally deal with them because I have a very strict screening process. If I come out with a property, before I'll even talk to a broker or a principal, I've got to know who they are, who they represent, do they have money? You've got to show me the money before you get onto the ranch, before you get in my truck, before you get in my helicopter, before you get in my data room. If I don't know that you have the money, you don't get to talk to me, much less get on the ranch, right? And there's only so many days in the week and weeks in the month, right? So I personally handle, a half a dozen to 10 sort of listings at any one time. So I've got to be really judicious with my time. And I don't treat billionaires any different than, guys that are, buying their first house.
Are these the people that I think there's a saying in Texas, all hat and no cattle?
There's a lot of those, mate. Yeah, all hat and no cattle. I don't have time for those guys.
And what about selling development stuff, either off the plan or development projects? Is there a different approach that you would take to that, or you have in the past?
Yeah, so I don't do a lot of that now. I have done a lot of that. I think the ingredients of a campaign are fairly similar. You have to be, I think part of selling well anything, whether it's a development or whether it's a big, iconic legacy ranch, I have to believe in it. If you're just being a slick salesman, I think, firstly, I don't want to do it. Because I'm not interested in being a slick salesman. I don't need to be. I get to say no more than I say yes. And so part of my success is that, I'll turn down a billionaire with a project or a ranch because I don't like him. I'm not a starving broker. So if he wants to run a campaign a certain way, or he wants to be involved in the selling process, I'm not his guy. If I'm going to be involved in a process, I have a 100% success track record. And I'm not going to lose that track record just because the owner or the seller or the billionaire or the company or the entity thinks that they're smarter than me. If they were smarter than me, they wouldn't be talking to me in the first place. So, and I'm saying that without trying to sound arrogant, but that's what I do. So the relationship is really important. I get, probably 10, 15 calls a week from people who want me to look at their project or take on their project. And like I said, I say no more than I say yes. Yeah. Now I'll refer out a lot of deals, and I'll craft campaigns for people that some of my agents that work for me and some of my staff will execute. And so I'll sort of, be above it. That's the other part of my business. But things that I engage in personally, where I'm hands-on, there's only one. There can only be one leader.
And what would your advice be for developers who are back here in Australia at the moment? The market is softening and it's getting harder to make deals. Have you got any advice or suggestions for how you would approach the marketing of stock in that kind of market or in that kind of environment?
Yeah, look, to me, the number one rule, because I've survived in markets that I started in the worst market probably in history, which was sort of that 92, 93, 94, 95 market in Southern California. Firstly, we had a horrible economy. We had fires, we had floods, we had, you name it, we had it. Banks were getting foreclosed on around the country. Banks were getting rolled up into sort of these REITs and these other things. And half the time people didn't know, who to pay their mortgage to. 1 minute they were dealing with, XYZ bank, and then next minute the FDIC came in and foreclosed on them, and so on and so forth. So what I've learned, I've got a few tenets of real estate, but one of the things I've learned in that regard is no matter what condition the market is, be in front of it. Don't chase the market. If you're a seller, if you're a developer or a seller, don't chase the market. Take your money off the table. Get in front of the curve, not behind the curve. If you don't take your losses now, you'll take bigger ones down the line. And be innovative. Engage with people who are out of the box and who come up with out-of-the-box solutions. If you've got brokers or representatives working for you just because they're a big box brand, or they say they're an international broker because they happen to be, an agent with an international company, that doesn't mean anything to me. I don't drink big box brand Kool-Aid, and I don't distribute it. When you're a good broker and you've made your way the way I've made my way, is you do it because you are out of the box, because you color outside of the lines, because you think differently, you act differently. It's about tenacity and perseverance and figuring out, as my dad used to say, where there's a will, there's a way. So, if you buy and distribute all the postcards or all the things that your, company is selling agents to, try and better themselves, like everybody else, then you'll be like everybody else. But to your question, be ahead of the market, be ahead of the curve, whatever that curve is, whether it's going down or whether it's going up, because it never lasts forever in either direction. And be creative and offer value and transparency, integrity, the type of campaign you put together. People in the world at whatever level, as a buyer, as a client, as a consumer, as a customer, they want to be heard, they want to be respected, and if you don't treat them the way you'd like to be treated, they're probably not going to be a customer, or a happy client, and certainly they won't be a repeat client.
And you mentioned you've got a couple of tenants of real estate. What are some of the other ones?
Yeah, so somebody will call me and say, a billionaire or whatever, and say, I've got this ranch, and it's the greatest ranch, and I spent all this money, and I've done this, and I've done that, and it's worth so much more than everybody else's or whatever. And here's what I tell them. And, and they'll say, I don't care if it sells in 3 years or 5 years, or maybe I don't even, we'll just see what happens. And I say to them, look, I'm not in the see what happens business. Everything I do is calculated. And so, we got to establish a relationship. So here's the tenets. First thing is, there's no such thing as being a little bit pregnant. You're either on the market or you're not. You're either for sale or you're not. Okay, that's number one. So let's figure out if what are the driving factors behind you even having this conversation with me today. That's number one. Number two is, I'm really fortunate to be able to do what I do. And after doing it for 30 years in this marketplace, I'm really fortunate that I get to choose to have some great relationships, successful ones, with successful people like yourselves. And what I'm really saying is, in a different way, in a diplomatic way, is I'm saying I get to say no. So immediately it's about leveling the playing field. I choose you just as much as you choose me. Most real estate brokers are sort of, salivating for a deal, and they'll take a listing at any price. I don't. I value it at what I think I can perform to. And I just say to them, there are guys out there who work for less and listed for higher, then I'm not your guy. And I say to people, you can have my national rate, my regional rate, which is 6%. You can have my national rate, which is 8%, or you can have my international rate, which is 10%. You pick. Generally, they'll pick the national rate, right? But I'm not a discount broker. I don't need to be. One of the biggest consternations of the real estate business, anywhere, I think, but certainly in America, is, the age-old commission battle between an agent and a vendor or a seller. I don't have that battle. I don't need to. I say to them, one of the other tenets is, there's plenty of discount brokers around. Go get one. But if you want the best, and you want to sell it under my program, and you want to, and I'm going to lead the campaign, I'm your guy. If not, I'm not your guy. It's pretty simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what would your top tip be for developers out there who are listening, who are thinking of, or would like to take their business to the next level?
For developers, again, I think if everything, whatever you do, whatever you build, whatever you advertise, whatever you market, if it has inherent value, you'll always do well. If it has inherent value and inherent values, whether you're selling a skyscraper or a block of flats, or a residential subdivision or a luxury subdivision, and be current. I mean, the appetite for Generation X's and Generation Y's are, it's a lot different than the baby boomer appetite, which was, bigger, better, more. People, the current culture is less is more. People want smaller places, and people want to be able to, to have value. Whether it's their first time home buyers, or whether they're buying a condominium or a townhouse, or whatever it is. Yeah,
I think that's a good point, because as a developer, particularly working with some agents generally will take somewhat of a shotgun approach with their marketing, trying to appeal to a broad range of audiences, which they'll categorize as first home buyers, downsizers, or investors. That's their markets. Whereas I think you really need to give more thought to who's the likely buyer and really go after them in your marketing, really try and talk to them.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that if, real estate agents put people into a box, right? If you're treating them as an investor or a first timer or or something, then you're not really treating. If you're categorizing them that way, then you're not really treating them as people. You're not listening. You're not treating them as a young family or a retired couple or a whatever their profile really is.
Yeah, because I don't think people think of themselves as being a first home buyer or a downsizer or an investor. Well, maybe an investor would, but as you say, they're people who are looking to buy a property that's going to suit what they want.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is, don't be afraid to say no. One of the other golden rules is don't be afraid to say no. Don't be afraid to walk away from a deal. At the same time, do everything you can to be creative and do and be engaging. Don't, if you're a developer and you're selling a subdivision and you've got sort of an agent there that's just handing out brochures and holding open houses and and it's all very superficial, then your results are probably going to show that.
Yeah, I definitely think this is a market where you have to dig deeper and do something different to try and stand out and get those deals across the line.
Yeah, and different doesn't mean crazy. Different just means more transparent, more genuine, more integral, more moral, more ethical. Because especially in a down market, selling at the end of the day is a masterclass in human psychology, and so people want to grab onto, especially in tough times, they want to grab onto. It's trust, it's values. I can trust this guy. This guy's not just trying to rack up his commission. You've got to be able to say to somebody, this is probably not for you. I bet I can find what you're looking for, but it's not here. It's not in this subdivision, or it's not, in this county or this area or this corner of town, whatever it is. But let me tell you about this, or let me tell you about that, or have you thought about this, or have you thought about that? Don't just sort of be, the hard sell on the product that happens to be on the shelf. And chances are, once you start talking to them about those other things, while you're doing that, that other person is thinking, wow, this person really does care. This person really is engaging. And quite possibly you'll come full circle back to the product at hand. Because if you talk through all of those other opportunities and the pros and cons of those other opportunities, and then you get back to where you're standing in whatever sales room, in whatever subdivision or unit complex it might be, now there's a trust that's built, right? Oftentimes selling is it's not a game, but it's a
I like to think of it as a dance.
Yeah, it's sometimes a reverse psychology waltz, Yeah.
All right, a couple of quick questions. I know you've got to go. What's the, not craziest, but one of the tactics that you did in one of these high-value campaigns that you went, oh, that was really cool doing that? I don't know, you got a satellite flyover or a helicopter flyover, or was there some particular tactic that stands out for you as being pretty special?
Yeah. So there's been a few of those. But early on in my career, I did a deal where, I sold a place and the sellers were really difficult. And when it came time for the buyers to do their final inspections, he locked the gates and wouldn't let anybody in and so on and so forth. So, I hired a helicopter, big one, and we just sort of hovered over the place for about 2 or 3 hours. We went around every building and every pasture and, every paddock and every house and inspected it that way and closed the deal.
Did you do the Top Gun style fly past?
No, but we were sort of pretty wary about getting shot at from below because it's Texas after all. There's a lot of guns around in Texas. But yeah, I've had some hairy deals like that. I think another one I did was, it was in the Menendez case. I put out a press release when I took it. I had to shift the positioning of the property right in the marketplace because it was a white elephant. It was stigmatized, blah blah blah. And so I put out a press release that it had to be sold. It was going to be an absolute auction and on X date to satisfy the lawyers, in court who needed, for the Menendez trial. And oftentimes I'll do things to flush people out of the weeds, and that's one of those cases. So we never went to auction. We ended up with a buyer.
So is auction a secondary strategy in the US or one that's not used that often?
Yeah, it's really a secondary or even third or fourth. Auctions aren't seen. Auctions here have a very negative connotation. I'll do things like call for offers. I'll draw a line in the sand, that kind of thing. But very rarely will I do an auction.
All right. And my other question was around when you sold the Wagoner Ranch for $720 million US, and you pick up your paycheck. Did you buy yourself a little toy or something of interest as a little token?
I did. I bought 2 things. Yeah, I bought an old Willys Jeep, and I bought a new pair of RM Williams boots. The boots were more expensive than the Jeep.
Oh, it's good to see you're still maintaining a connection to good Australian footwear.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Very nice. Well, Bernie Uechtritz, thank you so much for being on the Property Developer Podcast. It's been so awesome talking to you, and I really appreciate your time.
Pleasure. I'll send you an absolute pleasure, and I appreciate you doing it. And I'll send you a video link we just put out.
Yes.
Fun.
Yep. And if people want to find out more about you or about the business, where should they go?
Icon.global. www.icon.global.
Yeah, you can see some fairly hefty ranches and large properties on that side.
We've got something for everyone, mate. So come on in.
All right, Bernie. Thanks for talking with us.
You're very welcome. Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.
Okay, there you go. Sales agent extraordinaire Bernie Uechtritz sharing how he goes about selling unique high-end properties. I really enjoyed hearing about how Bernie approaches each campaign and how he is looking for that angle that will help make the property jump out in the market. Here are 3 things I took away from our conversation. 1. Every property has a buyer. I love Bernie's view that the property market is like the car market. There's an ass for every seat. So there's certainly someone out there for your development stock. The way Bernie goes about finding that buyer is to cast a wide net, create a competitive marketing environment, and manufacture a situation conducive to selling a property as fast as practical. He likes to generate interest over a 90 to 120 day period, get things to a fever pitch, and close the deal. So give some thought to how you could look to do something similar in your next campaign. 2. Find the unique angle or story that will help the property stand out. Bernie mentioned that he likes to design campaigns around the story or stories of the property he is marketing to help bring it to the market in a way that creates interest and ultimately a deal. He said every property is different and he likes to build a custom campaign around it. Even if the property has a stigma, like being a murder scene, you can be clear about it and make it work to your advantage. 3. Be a good listener. I found it interesting that Bernie works on being a good listener. He said that people want to be heard and respected, and that if you want repeat customers, it is wise to listen and respond to what people tell you. It reminded me of what past guest and former FBI hostage negotiator Chris Voss calls the Black Swans. A little piece of information that can turn a negotiation on its head and lead to an extraordinary outcome. So why not practice being an active listener in your next conversation and see how it goes? And speaking of Chris Voss, you may enjoy going back to our conversation in episode 33 and listening to the many nuggets of gold that he provided around negotiating and securing better deals, including this advice about how to be an active listener.
Feed it back to them, paraphrase it, how they feel about it, till they say that's right. You then begin to move forward at light speed as soon as the other side feels heard. So many problems are eliminated, so many barriers come down. So much cooperation happens as a result of that.
There really was a lot of great tips in that discussion with Chris, so I certainly think it is worth your time revisiting episode 33. Okay, don't forget to email me if you're interested in being mentored on how to develop property. Drop me a line via justin@propertydeveloperpodcast.com and I can send you some information on the program. Also, catch me on Instagram and Facebook for my latest news and videos under Property Developer Podcast. You can also post a comment on iTunes if you're enjoying the show. And of course, all the past episodes of the show can be found at propertydeveloperpodcast.com. So until next time, may you one day make $1 billion property deal.
You've been listening to the Property Developer Podcast. Tune in next time for more tips, ideas and inspiration to take your developing to the next level. For more developing love, make sure to visit propertydeveloperpodcast.com.